The story begins with the rowdy son of a noble family who reigned in the academy like a king. However, due to his reckless actions, he was expelled from his family and dormitory. Ed Roth Taylor, or rather Taylor, is thrown out of the dormitory along with his belongings. The other students who once feared the tyrant are now relieved they won't see him next semester. Anyway, it's all his fault since he tried to cheat on the entrance exam. The problem is, the person who did that isn't the tyrant Taylor anymore. It's the protagonist of the story. He ends up entering the game The Failed Swordsman, where typically you enter as an overpowered character, but our protagonist ends up in the body of a third-rate villain expelled from the dorms at the beginning of the game. Indignant with the situation, Taylor shouts that this is all unfair, claiming he always lived a simple and ungreedy life. However, the students nearby call him a scoundrel for saying that after what he did. The failed swordsman sits silently as he waits for the students to leave. Among his things, he picks up a mirror capable of showing his stats. Even though he's attending a magic academy, his intellect is dragging on the floor, and his stamina is so low it's pitiful. This was expected. He's a third-rate villain who only appears to be beaten up.
Why you bullying me?
The protagonist tries to remember what happens to Ed in the game. In the post-credits, it's shown that his fate is to become a beggar, wandering the streets. This leaves the MC completely shaken as he's now in the body of this beggar. Even though he doesn't know why he's possessing this body, he's determined not to let this be his end. The school is practically a city located on Mount Arkan. To escape the prying eyes of other students, he ends up in the underdeveloped forest. As it took him quite a while to get there, he had time to understand his current situation well. Even though Taylor has been expelled from his family and dorm, he hasn't been expelled from the school, which is extremely important since Sylvania is a top-tier academy, and as long as you graduate, you'll have a guaranteed future. Since the game is set in the academy, he can use his knowledge of future events to his advantage. Once he graduates, he can have a comfortable and lazy life. His main objective is graduation, but as this is a top-tier academy, the tuition is also very expensive. Without family support, his only option is to try to get a scholarship, but his stats are too low even for that. Before thinking about tuition, there are 3 more urgent things to worry about: shelter, clothing, and food. At least he won't need to worry about clothing since he has plenty in his suitcase. The problem lies with the other 2. He has nowhere to sleep at night, and thanks to his horrible reputation, it's impossible to get a job. His only option is to stay in the forest for now. At least he won't die of thirst since there's a stream nearby. There are 10 days left until the start of classes, during which time he'll become fit to attend this school. Surprisingly, Taylor can use windblade magic. However, since his stamina is terrible, even cutting a few pieces of wood leaves him extremely tired, and with tiredness, hunger only increases. When he was younger, his grandfather said he ate tree bark when there was no food. He lights a fire with magic and uses a chalice as a pot to heat it. Up close, it looks like chicken breast, but when he puts it in his mouth and eats, he vomits immediately afterward. After starving for a day and vomiting for 2, he concludes that wood should only be used in building shelters. The first step is to gather 4 supports for the cabin, but it's really difficult alone. He ends up falling due to the weight of the wood but uses all his strength to lift it and quickly tie them together. Even though he finds it wasteful, Taylor uses his clothes to cover the ground. After a whole day, he manages to finish the makeshift cabin. A system message appears congratulating him on creating a basic shelter. The beggar, who is extremely tired, says that the creation system is luckily working. Lived his life as a noble, so perhaps he didn't know he had more talent with his hands than with magic. To aid in hunting, he crafts a simple harpoon and tries to catch some fish in the lake. Probably his determination is the only thing driving him after so many days without eating. Taylor manages to catch 2 fish and fry them using his ignition magic. But when he finally goes to enjoy his meal, he notices someone approaching. One of the main characters and also the person who left Taylor in this situation, Princess Phonia. Ed Roth Taylor was a villain who used his noble status to hit on the protagonist's childhood friend, but clearly ended up beaten. In retaliation, he maliciously tried to manipulate the protagonist's entrance exam to get him expelled, but was caught in the act by the princess. Due to her insight ability, she can detect the lies and conspiracies of her target. Ed was in a pitiful state trying to invent lies, but was exposed by the princess. As we already know, he was eventually expelled from the dormitories, and now he has encountered the worst possible person at the worst time. Phonia approaches, asking why he hasn't been expelled yet. Taylor replies that he was expelled from the dormitories but is still a student of the academy. The princess is brief and tells him to leave immediately since she can't stand shameless people like him in this school. She continues to insult the beggar in every possible way, and she spends so much time doing so that his fish, which took 3 days to catch, ends up burning. Even though he's concerned about the fish, the girl in front of him is a bigger problem, as she really has the influence to expel him. Taylor mentions that the sun will set soon and asks why a princess who is usually protected by her soldiers is walking alone in an isolated forest. Fumiya thinks he's trying to threaten her and automatically prepares for combat. However, the protagonist kneels and says he's actually thanking the princess. Obviously, she doesn't believe his words, but her ability to detect lies perceives that he's telling the truth. Recalling the story's lore, the Roth-Taylor family used their name and influence to conduct human experiments in search of eternal life. Eventually, they were captured and executed, but as Ed was disowned, any connection with the family was severed. He may die of starvation or cold, but he won't be executed. Talking to the princess, all his words must be true, as getting caught lying is game over, or rather, life over. Analyzing the timeline, the reason the princess is alone, dressed plainly, and walking in the forest is definitely due to the class leveling test. In the game, this is a mission set by Professor Glass to find magical pearls hidden in the forest. The protagonist mentions that Professor Glass can be a bit perverse, and knowing the noble Princess Phonia, he must be aiming for the best class, but without her help, she will never make it into Class A. The MC says that in the south of the forest, under a giant tree, there will be a small gift he left there. When Fumiya approaches, she finds a small magic pearl. When he met Ed, he was definitely a liar and charlatan, but the tailor now spoke the truth. The next day, the class placement test finally ended. The professor instructs them to show the pearls they obtained. Some students with bright looks on their faces show the things they managed to find, but they are all placed in Class F. Glass explains that those who found pearls with low magical power are the only ones who reached Class A, and only 3 succeeded. Jigsaw the Wild Wolf, Loratel the Redhead, and lastly the person who found the pearl in the Guardian Tree. That pearl had extraordinarily high magical power, so that person will be placed at the top of the class. Meanwhile, the protagonist, who had his lunch burned, now doesn't even have the strength to use a spear, and ends up improvising a fishing rod. In the game's story, since she was young, Princess Phonia saw through flattery and sophistry, so she developed the innate ability that doesn't allow anyone to lie to her. For this reason, Taylor had no choice but to speak the truth. In the original, the reason the proud princess began to be called the Princess of Love was because she failed the leveling test and fell to Class F. If the present princess succeeded and reached Class A, then the information he has from the game becomes useless. At this moment, we find out that the one promoted to the top of the class was not the princess, but the sleepy mage, Lucy Merrill. Phonia knew that Ed was telling the truth about the pearl even before going to get it, so why didn't she pass the test? First of all, why did the princess hide her identity? She was embarrassed by the special treatment she would receive, so she decided to prove to herself that she could do everything alone. For this reason, she decided not to take the pearl, as it would be something she didn't achieve alone. The title of Princess of Love she will receive in the future is not an attribute or ability. It is something gained by treading a fair path. Even though he baited her, he knew that the princess wouldn't accept the gift. While thinking about this, Taylor finally catches a fish after a few hours. Our future beggar has to start running early in the morning to make it to school on time, but in the future, every drop of sweat and effort put into the academy will be worth it. The opening ceremony finally begins, and the students can enjoy the food while listening to the speech. Our protagonist can hear whispers of people speaking ill of him, but none of it matters, as he can finally enjoy a good meal. Some girls nearby are impressed that the person who looked pitiful during the entrance exam eats in such a polite manner, while the girl with pink hair says he seems strange somehow, as if he were a completely different person. Today is the first day of classes in Sylvania. The teachers give an enthusiastic lecture welcoming the new students, while Taylor almost got expelled on the first day. Phonia talked about him to the dean, but judging by the smile of that grumpy old man, she must not have said anything bad. Still, it's better to be careful so that the original story doesn't change. Due to living in the forest, the protagonist ended up acquiring survival skills, which he literally uses for his survival, even being able to hunt small animals. During the hunt, the MC ends up encountering the girl with pink hair. She is Janica Faylover, the top student of the second year, and one of the main characters. As soon as she detects the protagonist's presence, she asks if he's the funny guy Merilda was talking about, quickly appearing in front of him and introducing herself. Janica says that this forest is the territory of a high-ranking spirit named Merilda, and she ended up saying some things about the unwanted visitor who lives there. Upon hearing the phrase unwanted visitor, the protagonist feels worried since he cut down several trees and killed animals, but Janica tells him not to worry since that's the natural order of things. Taylor is relieved that even a huge wild wolf has a good heart, making Janica realize something. She extends her hands and shows a forest spirit that signed a contract, but Taylor can't see anything. Taylor thinks that if he wants to be friends with Janica, he just needs to intervene at the right time, but decides to step away, saying that he can't see spirits and that he only came there in search of food, leaving shortly afterward. The best option now is to follow the original plot plot. Only then can he gain informational advantage. Besides, Jenica is someone he should never get close to. Seeing Taylor leave, she tells Merylda that he really is a fascinating guy and apparently really can't see spirits, but wonders how he knew that the guardian of the forest was a giant wild wolf. Jenica is also sad since she tried to be kind, but Ed was only dry in his responses. But Jenica hasn't given up on winning him over and says she'll have other opportunities to see him. Meanwhile, we realize the hard life the protagonist is living. The distance from his cabin to the school is extremely long. Even leaving in the early morning and running at full speed, he almost always arrives late. To study, he uses a burnt stick and a stone slab. On the way home, he has to wash his sweaty clothes daily and still check several other things for the next day. Because of this, he only sleeps 4 hours, but that's not what's really bothering him. It's Jenica who has been following him all day. She asks how he noticed, but it would be stranger if he hadn't noticed. Taylor threatens, asking if she doesn't know who he is. The worst villain there is, the liar and swindler, Ed Rothstaler. That's the judgment other people make of him, but Jenica doesn't know him yet. This phrase reminds the protagonist what kind of character she is. Someone who seems naive and foolish on the outside, but knowing what awaits her in the future, it's simply impossible to respond to her with a refreshing smile on his face. Since Jenica Faylover will become the leader of the first act, even though she's the only person who still smiles at Rothstaler, he'll need to push her away somehow. The protagonist says his life is a mess and he's been rejected by his family, so he asks to borrow money from her. Every year, Jenica receives a scholarship for being the top student, but that doesn't just mean her excellence in academics. As she's from a poor background, the only way to enroll and advance in school is with that scholarship. Jana's only weakness is money, so unfortunately, she has to refuse his request, even though that was his main goal. 3 days later, Taylor still feels bad for what he did, but it's better than getting involved with important characters and changing the main story. The problem is he's a magnet for important characters. When he goes to enter his tent, simply the most powerful genie in the game, Lucy Merrill, is sleeping in his cabin. She wakes up complaining that he's so noisy she can't sleep, but when the protagonist asks what he did, Lucy responds that she's not talking to him, but rather the wolf the size of a house behind him. She says that the guardian keeps saying incessantly to Taylor to save Jenica at all costs. Even though she says this and points to where he is, the protagonist still can't see anything. In fact, the biggest problem now is her. Like a beautiful lazy person, Lucy goes back to sleep, so Taylor ends up realizing how she got there. Even though she's small, Lucy can use her magic to leap like a kangaroo, always looking for the best spots to take a nap. This camp is deep in the forest, where there's no one around, so it ends up being the perfect place to sleep. The next day, Taylor realizes he must do something about Lucy while she sleeps. The girl is casting advanced spells and floating. It's also dangerous for her to stay there too long since it can distort the original plot. Taylor manages to set up a rope trap to catch small carnivores, but Lucy deactivates the trap by taking the dried meat to eat. He knows he can't beat her, but there's a strategy. The MC comments that the castle maids were looking for her. Upon hearing this, Lucy immediately says she has something urgent to do and flees. There was information that everyone ignored. Lucy hates the dormitory maids who take care of her like mothers. Thanks to this information, he finally managed to get rid of another main character. As he went out into the forest with an axe in hand, Taylor thought that the fact that she stayed at the camp for 2 days hadn't changed anything in the original story, but he realized he was wrong. A few days later, the MC observes the Joint Combat Training Mission. It's literally a combat exercise simulation aimed at reducing lethality, so fighters use fake weapons and mages use basic elemental magic. Above all, in this class is when all the important characters appear, from Princess Phonia to the lazy Lucy. Even so, the most important character in this event is the protagonist, who coincidentally is also named Taylor. So to differentiate him from our protagonist, we'll call him the failed protagonist. The next fight is his. Taylor already knew that everyone from the first year would win the matches and ended up not paying much attention. In fact, the only thing he had to pay attention to was Jenica coming to talk to him. Ed is impressed that even after experiencing that pathetic person asking for money, she still manages to be extremely excited like a puppy showing the match list. The protagonist obviously isn't interested, but Jenica asks if he doesn't want to know who he's fighting against. At this moment, Taylor experiences true terror. At this point in the story, Ed Rothtaler had already been expelled, so he didn't participate in the tournament. Things get worse when he sees who his opponent will be. It's simply a main character, Princess Phomia. Before worrying about the beating he's going to take, he hears the guy with the megaphone say that the next fight is for the failed protagonist, this getting him extremely excited to see her. In fact, at this moment it doesn't matter who Taylor is going to fight against. Although he has lived as a failed protagonist for a long time, in the game there are thousands of endings, and all of them are extremely difficult. so Taylor hopes the failed one will win and achieve the best ending. The problem is that his opponent, Lucy Merrill, hasn't appeared yet, leaving the future beggar extremely worried. Luckily, he realizes that she's sleeping on the reserve podium and goes there telling her to go fight. If the fight is cancelled because she's lazy, it will be a big problem for the story, as this is the first time the failed protagonist wields a sword. In the original story, even though he was born to be a swordsman, he never held a sword. During this fight, the failed one will cut Lucy's magic and quickly get close. Lucy will be surprised by his speed and will use intermediate level electric magic, being disqualified and making the failed protagonist the first to defeat her. However, what happens in the fight is the total opposite. With just one spell, Lucy throws the protagonist out of the ring, leaving him extremely injured. His story is of a failed person who exceeds other people's expectations, even though everyone drew premature conclusions about his match. The failed protagonist manages to get up and face adversity. As in the original, he quickly advances towards Lucy. Taylor thinks this is the moment he'll use lightning magic, but this time she stops the blow using wind magic, throwing the failed one away. Taylor is totally shocked, realizing that the original story has changed. While seeing the failed one leave the arena, he thinks that leaving him alone will definitely be a problem. The wind protection Lucy used is a magic contained through the contract with the high-class wine spirit Merylda. According to the scenarios, Lucy and Merylda are separate entities. However, because of the 2 days she spent in his cabin, she ended up signing a contract and became stronger because of it. As their names and the princesses are called for the duel, Taylor rushes over to the failed protagonist, completely ignoring Fonia, who's in his way. In this fight, the failed protagonist was supposed to win and gain confidence in his sword, but in the end he lost because of the existence of a character that shouldn't even exist. Taylor shouts for him not to feel down since his fight was amazing. If the failed protagonist's heart is broken, there's a chance our protagonist will need to work harder on the story. Then we see a bit of Fonia's past. The first person to discover her talent was Emperor Kloll. This ability wasn't given by a god or anything like that. It was something she created as a means of protection. But even though she could see through people, there was still a horrendous abyss in her eyes. The prota asked her to take it easy, while the people around, hearing him shouting to the failed protagonist, think he was just trying to make fun of someone who just lost. Even agreeing with what people say about Roth Taylor, and knowing he was a liar to the end in the past, she knows that despair was genuine. Then the combat begins. Fonia says that our MC confuses her and intends to come to a conclusion with this duel. Knowing that the only magics Ed can use are fire and wind, she starts with a water ball and wonders how he will react to it. Her goal in this fight is to forget everything and have a great battle, but the reality is that the protagonist is hit by the magic without doing anything. The princess, who was expecting a great battle, is confused, while Taylor is lying on the ground like Yansha, quickly assuming defeat to avoid getting beaten up anymore. The other students start laughing at him, since he ended up being worse than the failed protagonist. While getting up, Taylor says it was a good fight and he learned a lot, but the princess finds it strange that since he stepped onto the stage, she didn't make eye contact at any moment. First of all, he was never interested in the duel. As he runs through the corridors, we understand why the protagonist lost on purpose. He simply tried to act as an extra, and also the most important thing now is to find out where the failed one went, since if the world's protagonist gives up now, his life as a rich vagabond will derail. Before he can find him, he's stopped by the princess, who followed him running. She's pissed off because he didn't even try to win the duel. Her head is already involved in many problems and he's just another one of those problems. When Taylor realizes she already has so much repressed frustration, he approaches, telling her to calm down since there's no need to get so worked up. When she finally comes to her senses, she's embarrassed by the things she said, telling him to forget it. The beggar takes the opportunity to hit the road, but she keeps talking about what it was like living in a palace all this time and decides to ask one last question. Fumiya questions if he knows about the dark side of the Roth Taylor, and the reason why he bothered the failed MC is because he needed to be expelled from the family. Even though she's almost entirely wrong, her deduction was accurate about the Roth Taylor family, but the protagonist says he has no idea what she's talking about since it's still too early to investigate them. This only makes the princess even angrier since logically it doesn't make sense for him to be rooting for the failed one when he tried to get him expelled a while ago. Our Pinocchio decides to just ignore all the questions and respond with lies, even knowing he would be detected, making Fonia even more pissed off. Since she has no evidence to prove what she's saying, she calms down and clears the way for him to go deal with what he needs. As he's leaving, Taylor feels a bit guilty. She's already so involved with the main story and still has to deal with one more headache because of him. Taylor says that the burdens he carries couldn't be compared to those of a princess, but sometimes she needs to relax a bit. This isn't the palace where she needs to worry about everyone, it's Sylvania Academy. Throughout Throughout her life, Phonia saw through others, but this was the first time someone saw through her. The MC wasted a lot of time in this conversation. If he's not quick, his life as a vagabond, or rather, the whole world could end. But before he can approach the failed one, he's stopped by his childhood friend. She says that the protagonist is already going through tough times and doesn't need him to bother him. The failed one also gets up, asking why he's still at the school. At this moment, Taylor realizes something he had forgotten. As much as he's a failure, he has a fighting spirit that never falters no matter how strong his opponent is. While he fought against the princess, the person who ran away without looking back was Ayla Triss, who comforted him after the defeat. The failed protagonist asks if Ed has something to discuss with him. Taylor realizes that as long as Ayla is by his side, he won't need to work so hard, so he just decides to leave, saying that the protagonist is good with swords, different from him. To be honest, Taylor thought the failed one would do his job as the game's protagonist and do all the heavy lifting, but now he feels relieved, as the character he lived alongside for so long is still fine. Even so, it's not like the other characters are going to start liking him out of nowhere. Taylor keeps going to the door until he sees an explosion in the training field. Originally, everyone should witness this while they're in their seats, the fight of the Gold Loratel's daughter and the spiritual witch Janica. Even so, the failed one and his friend are watching the scene. Taylor hopes he observes the combat well, since his first ordeal is approaching. Episode 1's boss, Janica Failover. After the combat, people surround her as she was the only one to defeat the new students. Janica becomes quite happy and thanks everyone, but ends up seeing the girl she just defeated being taken away totally injured and feeling extremely bad about it. Unlike the original, Lucy defeated the protagonist, and all the attention that should have been given to him went to Janica. She already has many friends, but this incident made things even more frantic, which might actually be good for our little Tarzan, as he won't see her for a while. 2 weeks have passed since combat training. Without the main characters, he can focus on studying and survival. Even his stats, which were horrible, have improved a bit, but it's still too early to be lazy. At this moment, Janica appears in the forest, embarrassed to see the protagonist almost naked, but Taylor says it's her fault for suddenly showing up. While sitting by the fireplace, Ed asks why she keeps coming back there. Janica says it's comfortable like an ultra-secret base, and also would like to ask him for some advice. The protagonist, in his monstrous shape, asks what advice. She says he probably didn't see since he left before her battle, but she ended up hurting someone. In fact, Taylor knows that his opponent used a forbidden intermediate level spell, but that doesn't matter to kind-hearted Janica, who still thinks she may have overreacted. She asks if she should apologize, although her friends stop her saying it was her opponent who erred first. But Taylor is different and tells her to do what she thinks is right. Janica is the lovely and cheerful second-year student. Everyone loves her because of this. If she has any self-criticism, people will always be on her side and encourage her, but Janica knows that even though someone is always protecting her, it doesn't erase the mistakes that were made. As she expected, Ed never stands unconditionally by her side. Taylor says he can't do anything if she's offended, but in reality, it's the total opposite. She wasn't offended by it at all. As innocent as Janica may seem, she actually understands people quite well. When the protagonist asked for money, she understood that he was indirectly telling her not to get too close, but it's precisely this side of Ed that strangely makes him comfortable to be around. The next day, we see that the protagonist has a serious problem. The failed swordsman game is considered a masterpiece, but few people have seen its true ending. As it is a multiple-choice game, there are several bad routes, and there is a character known as the beginner killer, as all encounters with her at the beginning of the game result in death. And this same person is chasing the protagonist everywhere, the daughter of gold, Loratel Kelchin. Loratel is designated as a hidden heroine. Unlike the princess, she's treated as a villain from the start, but her true face is only revealed in the second half of the story. At the moment you understand her loneliness and anguish, players are forced to choose between her and the princess. But our protagonist is not the protagonist of this story, and he bolts without speaking to her. Of course, the Gold's daughter won't let him go so easily. Loratel says Ed is a great inspiration, as even under difficult circumstances, he continues to strive. If you take away the fact that he's arrogant and egocentric, he really is someone to admire. Before leaving again, she offers 3 gold coins to hear her request. As Ed has been close to Janica recently, the mercenary would like him to help her make friends with her. 3 gold coins are really tempting, as it's the earnings of a whole month for some, but the protagonist is not a sellout, so he approaches and asks if the Gold's daughter also buys connections with money. Loratel puts the coins in Taylor's pocket, practically confirming his question. This money-obsessed fox realized she would enter into a political war with the princess for control of the academy, so she has already started to win allies. Taylor offers a handshake. Loratel thinks she managed to buy Ed. As for people who have been rich all their lives, a moment of of poverty is enough to crush their hearts. But it's exactly those small coins that lead their lives to ruins. Attacking the unemployed is supposed to be very easy and simple, or that's how it should have been. But the protagonist returns the 3 gold coins, gaining Loratel's attention. Of course, he's not happy with it at all. If he had taken the coins, his life would have been a little easier. But the downsides of being caught between the noob destroyer and the beautiful boss are much more frightening. That night, Loratel didn't feel humiliated by Ed's obvious rejection. After the conversation, she understood the pros and cons, and as a perfect businesswoman, she won't miss any opportunity within her reach. In fact, her plan is to turn Janica into one of her allies. Loratel apologizes for what happened in the joint combat. Janica asks how her wound is since she still feels bad. The mercenary thinks about manipulating her using her guilt, but is surprised by Janica asking how her conversation with Taylor went. Even though she says not to talk about others' personal lives, spirits are first-rate gossips, so she ends up hearing about most of the conversations in the north of the forest. Janica comes close and says that sincerity cannot be bought with money, and she prefers Taylor's approach in that sense. Anyway, she goes to her room saying she still has a lot of work to do and apologizes for hurting her so much during combat training. Loratel is somewhat disappointed that all her attempts to get allies didn't work out, but something also catches her attention. For some reason, Janica seemed to be at her limit. At the camp, the protagonist lays out all his clothes neatly, but Lucy, who was passing by, says the place stinks and uses magic that explodes, throwing his clothes everywhere. But something catches Taylor's attention before he gets annoyed. The senior maid from Sylvania's best dorm, Belle Maya. Coincidentally, she was also the person responsible for expelling Roth Taylor. Ed tries to explain what he's doing there, but the maid already knows because of Janica, but certainly didn't expect him to be living like Tarzan. Taylor couldn't take his eyes off the basket Belle was carrying. The maids are a group of elite women trained for household chores. Inside the basket, she carries the best ingredients she collected in the forest. Taylor tries to remember if she's an important character for the story, while Belle says there's no need to be so formal, but upon remembering that she has no impact on the main lore, the protagonist says he could never underestimate a maid who's always working hard. He thinks there shouldn't be a problem with extra characters becoming friends, and after a while of flattery, he managed to hear explanations about various edible fruits and mushrooms. 2 of his creations were also completed, and to relax a bit, he starts heating up tea in the chalice. His fire magic and wine blade have reached level 10 from how much he uses them. The tea finally gets ready, and he can enjoy a beautiful sunset while drinking his tea. Taylor feels like he's starting to have fun with all this, until something falls from the sky, exploding his camp. It is heavily thrown back, while Lucy says something almost killed her. The MC is confused since she is one of the most powerful people in the world, but the person who threatened her life was Belle Maya. Of course, all this wasn't for nothing. Lucy skipped class again, so Belle was just doing her job and disciplining her. But when Lucy realized she was going to get beaten up badly, she teleported as far away as possible. Taylor, who's already mad at her for destroying his cabin, gives her a smack on the head, saying she ruined everything, but realizes the smack hurt more than it should have. Lucy says because of the teleport, her magic is drained, so he takes the opportunity to get back at her. Taylor now goes to the library. As he's tired of living like a beggar, he seeks knowledge to build a real cabin. A girl approaches saying it's time to close the library, and notices he's been studying hard. Elka says she sees people studying so diligently as motivation for her to study too, introducing herself and asking our protagonist's name. As soon as he introduces himself as Ed Roth Taylor, the girl is shocked. This is a familiar reaction since his fame precedes him, but she says he's different from what the rumors say, and that rumors shouldn't be trusted. Elka says she also knows someone as sincere as our beggar, and that she'll be rooting for him from now on. She leaves saying she needs to go back to her dorm until a huge earthquake comes, knocking the bookshelf on top of her. The end of episode 1 and also the fight against the boss has begun. It's been 2 hours since the disaster began. The kids gather at the camp, while Ayla explains that this is a spiritual summoning magic, or rather, a magic to summon a high-ranking dark spirit, Glaskin. The princess says this is bad news, as the only person who can summon so many spirits is the best second-year student, Janica Failover. Everyone falls silent when she says this, as everyone there knows Janica's potential. The only one who steps forward and is willing to stop her is the failed protagonist. He says for now, the spirits can't leave the barrier, but they're alone to deal with this. Alvira says if everyone there puts their hands together, they might be able to defeat a high-level spirit, but the coward Clebius is not at all in favor of this, as even if they manage to defeat the intermediate spirits and subdue the boss, they still have to face Janica herself, and to make matters worse, there are 2 high-level spirits there. Alvira wonders if she really did all this alone, even though she's powerful, manifesting a high-ranking spirit and controlling several at the same same time should be quite difficult. Ayla says that's probably the power of Velosfer when it comes to evil spirits. They are the ones who really control the link. Jixu says that chatting won't help at all. They have to act, and the person who will decide what they have to do is precisely Princess Phonia. When everyone is looking, waiting for her decision, she remembers the protagonist's words and decides to go face her in an hour, but only the best students from each year will be able to go. Another student comes with a report. Audrey's hall and the potion warehouse are protesting and probably won't join the fight. Suddenly a student arrives saying a librarian's apprentice and a second-year student are trapped in the library. Phonia asks their names and finds out the girl is Elka Islan. As soon as she hears the name of her childhood friend, Jixu heads towards the library to rescue her, but the Daughter of Gold and the princess say the library is too far away and they need his strength now. The princess asks who the other student is there, but the girl hesitates to speak, making Jixu angry and asks what she's hiding. As soon as she hears the name Ed Rothtailor, Jixu's expression changes. The girl says he stayed there late into the night and didn't have the courage to send him away, so she asked Elka to do it. Everyone there knows what kind of guy Rothtailor is, leaving Jixu even more pissed, but Phonia needs him in the attack and asks to have a little faith in Ed. Everyone there is paralyzed after hearing what the princess said. Rothtailor is such a big jerk that even if she used all the words in the world to convince them, it wouldn't be enough to convince them, so Jixu sets off to find his friend. Some medium-level spirits try to block his path, but they are easily defeated. He is filled with pure hatred, thinking that if Rothtailor does anything to his friend, he'll beat him right there. Jixu's past is literally the phrase from poverty to wealth. He lived in distant savannas that even the power of the kingdom couldn't reach. There was the world where survival was of the fittest until the end of the day. Jixu is a descendant of nomadic peoples, but when he reached adulthood he was separated from his family and lived alone like a lone wolf, doing everything possible to survive as a true beast. But one day, a young girl asked his name and said he looked like a wolf walking on two legs. At that moment, Jixu realized he wasn't a lone wolf, but a cub abandoned by the pack. After that day, Elka's father accepted Jixu into the family. Pursuing the fast pace of civilized life made wilderness become a distant memory. The wolf cub became a man, but if it's to protect her, the man will once again become a beast. The reason for all this is because of the rumors about Rothtailor, a cheater who harasses freshmen. Jixu runs quickly through the school corridors. Seeing Rothtailor sitting on the floor, totally injured, he asks where Elka is while Ed says she's in the literature room. When Jixu enters, his friend is fine, sleeping peacefully. All his worries vanish for a moment. Looking around a bit, he notices several bookshelves surrounding her as if they were trying to protect her. The curtains are also drawn to block the spirits from seeing her, and even a note is written on the board warning her not to leave. Realizing that the blood on Elka's jacket is not hers, leaves him with only one choice, the one who sacrificed his body to protect her, Ed Rothtailor. 3 hours ago, when the shells started falling, Taylor managed to save Elka thanks to his daily strength training. He finds it strange that the epilogue of episode 1 is happening earlier than expected, but hopes that the failed protagonist and the other characters can handle it on their own. Of course, he can't just stand idly by. After all, time is of the essence, so he starts building a barricade around Elka to protect himself from the spirits. But at that moment, he realizes something. What makes Janika's powers special are her strong mastery of spiritual understanding and spiritual connection to Taylor. These are impossible knowledge to acquire since he can't see spirits, but since all the spirits summoned by Janika are materialized, this might be his perfect opportunity to increase his experience. After the battle, his spiritual magic skills have risen considerably, but still not enough to secure a contract with the spirit. At this moment, Jixu appears carrying Elka and asks what he's doing there. The protagonist simply responds that he was training, but obviously the wolf boy doesn't believe his words. Now he understands what kind of human being Rothtailor is, thanking him for saving his friend and that he will repay this debt at any cost. The friendship between Elka and Jixu was of little importance to appear in the main scene, so it ended up being forgotten. Even so, this man is a friend of the failed protagonist who trusted him from the beginning to the end of the story. It says he probably ran out of the student center, but now that he has confirmed his friend's safety, he must return to battle and help Taylor. Jixu is a little confused with Rothtailor sending him to help Taylor McClure and asks why he considers him so much. Ed explains that it's not a matter of consideration. The failed protagonist has the elemental cutting ability that is the only one that can harm that monster, so Jixu thanks for the advice and leaves. The protagonist thinks that now that he is given advice, the story should unfold like the original, but the fact that Jixu is still not the failed protagonist's best friend is strange. In the original, the protagonist learns the elemental move by training with Jixu, but since the end of Act 1 happened too early, there wasn't even a chance for that scene to happen. This also means that without the elemental elemental cut. No one in that group will be able to cause any damage to Tarkin. Because of his mistake, the whole original plot is crumbling. At the student center, Jigsaw apologizes for the delay and says he will pay for his mistakes. But the princess says that even if he had been there, they would have lost anyway. Everyone is extremely injured since the first attempt failed. The guard says that if they want to invade again, they will need to wait for reinforcements. Fonia is very worried about what will happen since luckily they managed to retreat from the battle. Her guard and the best first-year student were injured. Now she doesn't even know if there is a way out. At this moment of despair, someone arrives saying they shouldn't waste time going after Tarkin. Judging by the progress of the summoning ritual, soon it will be complete, and the best choice now is to split the team in two. Messing with the main story was the last thing he wanted to do, but now Taylor has no choice. Clevius asks if he's making some kind of joke, but Jigsaw, who is now on Taylor's team, tells him to shut up. The protagonist says they need to get through the fire spirit Tarkin. The problem is that Tarkin has an impenetrable defense, so his plan is for one group to attract his attention while the other passes to subdue Janica. Lorital says that's a terrible idea since they only managed to escape by sheer luck, and if the group attracting attention fails, things could go very wrong. But Taylor says they should only be assessing the risk if there was another option. Then Lorital says that the real problem is who will be part of the attraction group, as it is practically the Suicide Squad. The failed protagonist, being a good protagonist who likes to put himself in danger, says he wants to go, but Taylor refuses, saying that he will be needed in combat. In fact, they're seeing all this wrong. The attraction group won't die, and they also don't need to be divided equally. Only he, Clevius, and Loritel are enough to attract Tarkin. The two obviously don't want to participate in this, especially Clevius, who hates Roth Taylor because of his reputation, even not understanding his intentions. The princess decides to follow his idea and divide the team into two, the team of powerful characters and the Suicide Squad. As a precaution, she asks that none of them die, while all teams set out for their goals. In the hallway of the building, Taylor just tells them to follow his orders and everything will be fine. As they advance, the MC is sure they will win, even telling Clevius not to worry so much. As fearful and lacking in confidence as he is one of the strongest when it comes to combat. Clevius realizes that Roth Taylor is full of confidence and begins to think that there really is a way to win, since the only thing they need to do is to attract the attention of that giant lizard. He had only decided to join this team because the princess's firm attitude convinced him, but realizing he's not alone in this, he can gather a bit more courage to face his fears. Clevius approaches the lizard, which is already preparing an attack, but when he asks Ed what he has to do, the two simply vanish, leaving him alone to face the lizard. Desperately, Clevius starts to flee and shout that they were traitors. Loritel is outside listening, remembering the protagonist's words. As Clevius advances alone, Taylor tells her to leave. Loritel asks if in the end he'd always planned to sacrifice Clevius, but Ed says he's not a sacrifice. As much as it may not seem like it, he is one of the best students at the academy. Moreover, her most important function will be hers, since she is in charge of ensuring a path for the entry of the subjugation group and delivering a critical blow to Tarkin. As she prepares the spell, she thinks that one really shouldn't trust rumors. Ed knew that everyone might hesitate and doubt themselves, but Loritel is different and tells her to just blow everything up. When the subjugation group arrives, Loritel asks what they are doing and orders them to enter to subdue the boss. She remembers that during combat training she ended up blowing up the ceiling of the hall. Perhaps that's why Taylor had left this function to her, and begins to find him quite interesting. As the subjugation group advances, Loritel remembers her other function. Clevius continues to desperately flee from the giant lizard and shouting that if he survives, he will kill both of them. The mercenary prepares the spell and remembers the protagonist's words. Even if they manage to attract Tarkin, they can't let him roam around the school, as that would destroy everything. The only way is to trap him, and for that, they first need to deal with his mana-resistant shell. Of course, Taylor already has a plan. While he runs up the stairs of the building, Loritel says that he was really right, and that without the elemental cut, it is impossible for anyone from the raid to defeat Tarkin. Arriving on the balcony of the castle, Taylor knows that what they need to defeat Tarkin is enormous firepower, and it has become clear who will use it to achieve that power. As he holds Lucy, Taylor is really angry, wondering how she can sleep in this chaos. Thanks to the destruction of the shelter, she had nowhere to sleep, so she returned to the place where she used to take a nap. Probably Belle's irritation is a strategy to take Lucy out of the scene, making her spend all her mana and fall asleep. The little witch ends up waking up after smelling dried meat. Taylor just throws all the food that was in the bag into her mouth and prepares to throw her at the giant lizard. Thanks to the exercises he did surviving in the jungle, his strength is enough to throw Lucy at high speed towards Tarkin as if it were a bomb. She explodes, releasing all her power at once. While the protagonist is almost dragged by the impact, he remains firm looking at the lizard since this is the most important moment. Tarkin is a high-level fire spirit that has a shell capable of withstanding anything, but after being hit by Lucy's high-ranking magic, his shell is shattered. Knowing that now his attacks can cause damage, Taylor decides to take advantage of the opportunity to get as much XP as he can by delivering the last hit. Before that, we see Janika's story. Because of her talents, she always received a lot of love from her mother, who was proud to have her as a daughter. In school, this love and pride continued as people could trust her for anything. Because of that, the pressure to meet their expectations weighed on Janika's shoulders. Seeing that everyone is there, she thinks she should greet them with a smile on her face as always. But who is really controlling her actions is not her, but the giant demon behind her. Realizing that the main fight must have already started, the protagonist just decides to leave it to them and continues on his goal. He tells Loratel that it would be great if Lucy had killed the lizard, but it doesn't matter since they will end it themselves. Loratel asks how they will do that since she launched 2 ice spells, but nothing happened. The best way to kill the lizard is by cutting its throat, and since her ice magic is not suitable for cuts, he will need to do that. Loratel asks if it's not better to leave that to Claudius, but changes her mind as soon as she looks at him. Taylor will take responsibility for killing him and just wants her to be able to stop his movements once. As he advances, he says he will be betting his life on her, but asks her not to consider it a bet, but an investment. As she prepares the spell, Loratel says she liked him much more than the princess who is acting like a monarch just because she is of royal lineage and also intending to bet her life on it. Claudius can't stand to flee anymore, so Taylor advances to the lizard. Seeing the monster preparing the spell, he begins to understand why Claudius was so afraid. Even so, he continues to advance while preparing his wind blade, but before reaching the boss, something catches his attention. Gaskin's right arm appears in the sky, which means that the failed protagonist group entered the boss's final phase and that things are going as expected, but the timing is not good since such a scene would attract anyone's attention. While facing Tarkin's magic, Loratel's attack hits him at the last second. Even in the midst of such turmoil, she makes no mistakes. The same goes for our protagonist, who used this skill thousands of times. The maximum level wind blade pierces Tarkin's neck, finally defeating him. Of course, he wasn't the only victorious one. The failed protagonist advances to the right hand, completely cutting it off. Due to the explosion, he is thrown away now with completely white hair. Even being a failure, he is really the protagonist of this story. Meanwhile, Taylor sees the sky crack, finalizing the end of this battle. Loratel says she has met many people who claim to risk their lives, but they were all cowards. Looking at Ed's empty expression, she asks what the problem is since they just went through the life or death crisis, and decides to introduce herself formally once again. They shake hands, but when Ed looks at her hand, the 3 golden threads are there. This time she managed to catch him off guard and says she now owes him a favor. Taylor is worried if she will really keep in touch since he doesn't want to get involved. Who comes to talk to him is the failed protagonist. Even though he doesn't like Roth Taylor, a debt is still a debt, and thanks him for saving them. Claudius, who is still angry, tells him not to show respect to someone like him since he almost died because of his betrayal, but everyone tells him to shut up. The princess also thanks him and says she can recommend him to the student council, but Taylor says there's no need since it was Lucy who truly helped defeat Tarkin and the failed one who defeated Glaskin. The alchemist asks if he's throwing away the credits out of shame, but Jigsaw tells her to be more respectful to her seniors. Seeing this scene, the protagonist is happy since he can see all the main characters at once. After all, each one there is playing their role in this world. The failed protagonist grows stronger with each approval, and his childhood friend grows stronger alongside him. The princess eventually accepts her fate as a monarch and matures slowly. Jigsaw finds his own path amidst civilization. Claudius gains a little more self-confidence while Alvera realizes that life is not just fun. They were all main characters who had their own roles to play, and in the end, they all received a trophy called success. Knowing this, he stepped back and went to look for something that couldn't be seen during the course of the game. On the stage where the confrontation took place, there is a locker where Lucy used to nap during exercises. Taylor always felt there was something wrong with that, so he needed to go there to confirm. Backstage, who was hiding inside the locker after the confrontation was Janica. He remembers the conversation he had with Loratel. The last time she talked to Janica, she managed to see a little of her room. In every corner, there were beautiful gifts symbolizing people's sincerity and gratitude. The problem is that there were so many that there was no space to put a book on that huge table. Her wall was full of stickers and notes that weighed on her like stones. The solution to that was simple: to store the countless gifts and remove the stickers from the wall. But Janica became obsessed with the fact that she had to honor the goodwill and sincerity she received. Needless to say, what she did was reckless, so Velosfer took advantage of the darkness and managed to control her. Due to the failed protagonist, losing to Lucy and her being seen as the heroine. This part of the story accelerated much more than it should have. The reason the failed one lost was due to Lucy's contract with Merilda. This only happened because she went to take a nap in a cabin in the forest, and the one who built that cabin was a character who shouldn't even be at the school. Janica tries to appear relaxed and says that inside that box is cozier than she expected. She certainly didn't expect Taylor to find her so quickly, since she's about to burst into tears right now. The protagonist remembers the wolf's request to save Janica. Perhaps Merilda asked him to do that precisely because he was the only person to distance himself from her. In the end, his attempt to make a contract with the auto-rank spirit failed, even after studying and training magic late into the night every day, always smiling at his family, friends, and teachers. She certainly went through many difficult moments in secret. Taylor doesn't know how comforting those words can be, but says she has certainly worked hard to get there. At the top of the stage, there is a proud parade of the main characters, where they are applauded and praised. Behind the stage, it is dark and silent. The villain of the first act leaves the stage as soon as the main characters move forward, even though he has witnessed the conclusion of the first act countless times. This is the first time he really manages to see everything. Since his spiritual abilities are at their maximum, he can see all the spirits surrounding Janica. All the spirits, including Merilda, seem satisfied with his action. Now, 10 days have passed since Janica's trial. She acknowledged all her mistakes and declared that she would accept the punishment willingly. However, the students and teachers expressed their support for her. In the second trial, the princess says that she could not be judged for attempted murder, as she was being controlled by an evil spirit and did not do it consciously. Even Lortel showed up to resolve the damage suffered, making the commercial association fully compensate for the restoration of the academy. Of course, it was not for free, since she got a contract that halved the ordering fees on school supplies. The result of all this was that Janica's expulsion was revoked. Everyone was extremely happy. Her friends noticed her sadness and prepared a big celebration tea for Janica. She still seems a bit down, but her friends will avoid talking about anything related to the incident and try not to bother her. The problem is that when the two go to talk to Janica, she asks what the difference is between liking and loving someone. The two are startled, asking why she suddenly said that, but Janica replies that a friend has recurring dreams of a knight riding a white horse. The two get married and live happily ever after. Anis asks what else this friend said. Janica replies that when she looked in any corner of the room, she could see the person's face in her mind. Realizing the situation, Anis runs away as fast as possible, leaving her friend behind. She knows she needs to approach this slowly to avoid hurting her extremely delicate friend's heart, and also so that other people don't find out about Janica Feylover's secret love. She decides to say that liking or hating someone is a confusing feeling, and also that this is not the best time to be honest with her emotions. Besides, it is better to handle these matters delicately, since it would not be good for her reputation if other people found out. Janica thanks her for the advice and says she needs to return to the main hall to report her suspension. Her friend managed to relax completely since she avoided the explosion of a bomb at the school. Our protagonist, who saved money tirelessly, managed to spend a little due to the suspension of fees and bought a toolkit. As he returns to the camp, he meets Janica, even though he had to avoid her all this time. Now that the first act is over, she's just a supporting character, and he sees no problem in starting to socialize. However, as soon as he speaks, Janica hides behind a tree and runs away, unable to be honest with her feelings. Taylor finds it impressive how he managed to make a good and friendly person lose her composure, but he can't dwell on that too much since he's busy. Finally, it's time to leave the shack and build a real cabin to live in. On the first day, he chose the location to build the cabin. By the third day, he managed to gather the necessary wood for it. By the sixth day, he paused wood collecting since the semester results were announced. Apart from practical classes, all his grades were extremely high. An observation is that Janica continued to ignore him, while her friends looked at him as if to tell him not to approach her. After 18 days, the woodworking is almost complete, and since the holidays began, he could invest all his time in building the cabin. Lucy continued to fall into traps, making him think he should stop using dried meat as bait. On the 27th day, Bella Maya came to deliver herbs and mushrooms to him, but when she asked how things were with Janica, she was confused when Taylor said she might be hating him. On the 30th day, the cabin construction is going wrong. Unfortunately, our protagonist doesn't have Lloyd Frontra's knowledge and once again encountered a group of Janica's friends, but she fled when their eyes met, while her friend seemed to have noticed something. On the 37th day, Jixu came to help him. He said the failed protagonist is really a nice guy, as he had said, and after 45 days, he finally finished building the cabin. There was nothing on the floor and walls, but at least there was a roof, and if he closed the door, not even an insect could get in. Our protagonist went from being a beggar to a country bumpkin, and while resting, he heard a noise coming from the ceiling. When he went outside inside to see what it was, he found Lucy taking a nap. At that moment, Janica appeared, greeting him. A few hours earlier, Belle mentioned the cabin that Taylor was building in the middle of the forest, and when she saw it for the first time, she found it more impressive than expected and wanted to go inside to see what it was like. She said it's extremely natural to see a cabin in the forest and want to go inside to see what it's like. In short, she's manipulating Janica to take the first step with Taylor. She then said she was passing by and was curious about the cabin, wanting to see what it's like inside. The protagonist finds it strange that the spirits didn't tell her about it, but Janica said they mentioned it briefly. In fact, they gave detailed descriptions of how Ed built the cabin, mainly talking about the muscles in his body, but she swears she didn't spy on him and knows all the details of how he's been living. Even though it's just a wooden cabin, the protagonist invites her to see how it is. Then finally, evening comes, and Janica says she owes a lot to everyone else, especially to Fumiya, Lortel, and all the others who helped by lending money for the tuition. Taylor says she shouldn't worry about paying back the debts since it's a generalization to think that you have to pay what you owe. Unfortunately, she can't understand that the incident happened because the weight of all that sincerity from others pressed on her. Even though so many people invested in her, Janica decided to move from state-of-the-art facilities to old-fashioned ones just because she wanted to owe a little less to others. But the Dex Hall is a shared room for at least 8 students. Living with so many envious looks would be like chaining Janica to a prison. Looking at her now, Taylor knows that in the end, none of her implicit problems were solved, but he says that if she decides to isolate herself, she can come by any time since it won't be a bother. She is very happy with that, and also says that if one day he is overwhelmed, he can ask her for help, as when that happens, she will help him at all costs. Taylor looks at the sky thinking about how overwhelmed he would be. The second semester is approaching, and with it the beginning of Act 2. A grimoire kept inside the school will cause a great storm that will devour the entire academy, and probably Lortel will do it. Nevertheless, the protagonist says he will never be overwhelmed, as it's not him who will have to go through difficult times, but the game's protagonist. In the story of the failed swordsman, the honor students of Ophelis Hall have a life as nobles almost guaranteed since they gained several advantages, but that's precisely the problem because of a period of heavy rain and a rule of the academy that only the students of Ophelis Hall were benefited. The inferior students of Dex Hall began to get frustrated by that, and eventually the repressed feelings of these students exploded into a rebellion. Of course, this didn't happen out of nowhere. Lortel instigated all this. The merchant contacted a representative of the inferior students and made him start the mess in the academy. Willain was an expert in provoking and manipulating others and already had a justification, so it was easy. A proposal was made to change this situation, but just the idea that the academy would have to accept the proposal was enough to enrage the common students, who made the situation big and showy after attacking Ophelis Hall. All those extremely expensive things were burned, causing a great cost to the school. The academy, which was already in a difficult situation due to the last incident, will be forced to sell the most important thing to them, the sealed sage's grimoire. Lortel watches the rainy sky, remembering her days of poverty. She knows that in this land of learning, there is plenty of light, but because of that light, she can see the dirty darkness in it. At this moment, the only thing she wants is someone the same, a disgusting person who lives like a gutter rat. During the revolution, the students shout for their rights, and throughout all this confusion, there are some main characters. The first is the intermediate boss of the first floor, Toto, the deceiver. The failed protagonist ended up beating him up, and thanks to that, he was bribed by Lortel. His role was to dominate the new maid who protects the first floor and open the hall, letting all the other students in. Toto is a character who doesn't play such an important role, as his only function is to delay the main character and his friends. However, the role that was originally for Toto is now being played by Ed Roth Taylor, who has just become an intermediate boss. To explain how this happened, we need to go back 2 days. While hunting for his meal, the protagonist realizes again that Ed Roth Taylor's body really has no talent when it comes to combat skills, even forcing himself to use the bow every time he hunts. His proficiency with the bow is completely ridiculous, and to make matters worse, he realizes that with each passing day, he receives more visits to his camp, and he lives quite far from the school. Of these frequent visits, 3 of them are worth mentioning. The first is the lazy mage, who usually comes to visit him at random times and bothers him with stupid questions. The second is someone he's genuinely glad to receive. Janica always shows up with some treats and ends up teaching him how to do household chores. His gratitude for her knows no bounds, even if occasionally she seems a bit out of the ordinary. Taylor had to explain this to mention the third visitor, the daughter of gold, and the person who is the black veil of the second act. She's probably trying to gather people who will be useful. Taylor intends to simply ignore her, but Lortel says she didn't intend to call him either. However, since Toto is unconscious, she had to resort to it. When the protagonist hears that something happened differently from the normal scenario, he immediately asks what happened to Toto. In fact, during the discussion with the failed protagonist, Toto ended up saying that he was worse than Ed Roth-Taylor, so he received a punch from Jigsaw, who was angry with his words. Loretel says the job is simple. He just has to grab the key to the hall and open it from the inside for the students to enter. Of course, Taylor doesn't support this idea and says that several other students could do it, but the mercenary practically says she only approached him because of his crappy reputation. Knowing he was expelled from the hall, Loretel thinks Taylor must be angry and wants to get back at the academy. However, the protagonist says he's not at all interested in doing that, but whether he likes it or not, he has to make the main story progress normally, and he'll also earn 20 gold coins for doing so. While protecting himself from the rain, the protagonist knows that this strategy of ruining the academy's finances is complete madness. However, because of this, a new group that rivals the princesses will appear. Mercantilism will fight with the student association to see who dominates the school. In fact, what matters is who the failed protagonist will choose, as that will be the winning side. When that happens, our beggar will join the side that's closest to winning, since he also needs to survive. At that moment, Janica arrives, drying herself from the rain. She finds Ed really amazing for being able to live there even with these rainy days, and says that if he needs anything, he just has to tell her, and she'll help him with pleasure. Since she decided to move to a smaller room, she'll have to throw away many of her things, and to avoid wasting them, she would like him to accept them. Janica is like a little puppy, talking about all the things she can bring, while the protagonist says he would gladly accept. Janica also asks if Lucy does this often. The protagonist knows that these extraordinary powers didn't come for free. Due to her laziness, she had to deviate from her destiny, but on rainy days like this, it's impossible not to reflect on her life. However, Taylor doesn't care and simply tells him not to pay attention to her. He remembers that Janica is still in Ophelis Hall, and when it is invaded, the protection room will be activated, locking the students in their rooms. So, to avoid any danger to her, Taylor asks her to wait for him tomorrow around 9 o'clock at night in the Rose Garden in front of the hall. She gets quite excited, thinking it will be a date, and leaves extremely happy. The MC knows that around the beginning of the semester, the rains will stop, so he can enjoy sunny days again. In Ophelis Hall, while training, Jigsaw says he lacks posture and didn't expect his friend to get so angry over punching someone. He finishes exercising and looks out the window, seeing a hooded man entering the hall. Since his vision is sharp, he can identify that man as Roth-Taylor. The MC asks where the other maids are, and the newcomer answers that they are all in the meeting hall. She has also prepared the requested items in advance, and with all preparations ready, the occupation mission of Ophelis Hall begins. The students outside shout that they can't take this treatment anymore, while Willing continues instigating the discussion. Suddenly the gate opens, and all the students rush inside. Willing approaches to find out who Loretel bribed, but is surprised to see Roth-Taylor there. The protagonist pretends he always agreed with the things he shouted and saw him as a hero. Willing feels like an idiot for judging him based on rumors and starts to get emotional, but Taylor pushes him to the next floors and tells him he needs to continue leading everything. In fact, Willing will be the one to take the blame for all this, while the first floor maid took the opportunity to escape while the protection rooms are activated, trapping the students. Walking through the hall, the protagonist thinks everything is going according to the original scenario. Loretel appears and says it was a good idea to leave all this to them, as the academy staff will repress this invasion as soon as they arrive, so it's better for her to finish things before that. However, before leaving, Loretel asks an unexpected question, asking if our protagonist has ever killed someone. Taylor obviously says no, so Loretel says that she has never directly killed anyone either, but she crushed the lives of other people to survive. She lived her whole life betraying and being betrayed, leaving everyone who crossed her path in misery. Even knowing that a person like her doesn't deserve sympathy, she ends up asking if Ed sympathizes with someone like her. Ed says no, as you need to take responsibility for your decisions, and with a sympathetic look on her face, Loretel says he should do what he came to do since there isn't much time left. The protagonist sits in a chair, waiting for the story to unfold. Willing will lose control of the defense spells and transform into the boss of the 4th stage, while our Taylor just needs to sit there waiting for the failed protagonist to arrive and fight, stealing a little time. Meanwhile, in the Rose Garden, Janica finds it strange that a carriage is arriving so late at night, but decides to wait for Taylor since he left a note saying he would be late. In fact, she won't leave until Taylor arrives, although she feels guilty for following what he was doing through the spirits. All the people who arrived there were immediately reported, and coincidentally, most of them were women. Janica realizes that the flower clip she's wearing may have been a bad choice, and decides to go to her room to change it. Meanwhile, a group of 3 people approaches the hall. Alvera is worried about the herbs she left in her room and intends to go in to get them. The failed failed protagonist asks his friend to try to stop her since it's dangerous for the other students if she's angry. However, neither of them can do it, and Alvera kicks the door open. As soon as they enter, they find Roth Taylor sitting in a chair, analyzing all the destruction around him. Alvera asks if he will try to stop them from entering and questions whether he can actually do that since all three of them are powerful and Ed is just an amateur who can only use basic magic. The three prepare for battle. The failed protagonist asks why he's doing this and what's happening upstairs, but he doesn't get any answers. He advances toward Roth Taylor, who defends himself by throwing a chair. Of course, a chair won't be enough to stop a swordsman, but it buys enough time for him to prepare a spell. Alvera thinks he will aim for the swordsman, but Taylor aims upward and hits a pillar on the ceiling that almost falls on the failed protagonist. Before the smoke clears, Alvera is attacked with a wind blade that cuts the strap of her bag, causing all the magical ingredients to fall to the ground. Seeing Taylor so far away, she seizes the opportunity to retrieve her potions. In fact, this is exactly what he expected, and using his ignition to set the entire hall on fire, Alvera realizes that the battlefield has already been established and that Roth Taylor's judgments were quick and precise. Previously, Jigsaw had said he had high proficiency in magic, but in reality, it's as if he were a god of combat. The battle begins with Ruth Taylor against three students, and our protagonist showing who's in charge around here, Alvera, witnessing the situation against our protagonist. She may be the best alchemy student in the academy, but there's a small problem. Alchemists fight with magical tools or elixirs, and without them, their combat strength is almost zero. It's common for an alchemist to carry a ring or a magical necklace, but Alvera, thinking of herself as a genius, never considered having one. Seeing the protagonist's demeanor amid those flames, she contemplates the possibility that he premeditated the entire fight. The falling chandelier, the small openings he created to launch a fire barrier, all strategically planned to take her back. She can't believe that this guy, Ed Ruth Taylor, could have thought of all this. Alvera still has one last trick up her sleeve. As a final option, she pulls a magic orb from her pocket and summons a spirit beast, applying a fire resistance formula to it to make it furious and amplify its strength. Now, their mage is desperately searching for a spell to extinguish this fire and casts a spell with that in mind. However, a wind spell blocks her attempt, and then a gust of slicing wind almost causes damage. Taylor arrives at the last moment to defend against that attack and tells his friend to pull herself together. In magical theory, Isla's friend is incredible, but she lacks practical experience and is panicking in this situation. Taylor and Ruth Taylor know this, which is why the protagonist keeps targeting his spells at her, preventing Taylor from advancing toward the protagonist and landing a decisive blow. But at this moment, someone catches Taylor's attention. Alvera asks if he can get closer to the protagonist and also makes her attack with the monster rabbit. The villain finds himself trapped with the rabbit coming at him and Taylor also charging at him with all his might. At this moment, Alvera runs into the flames and successfully reaches her bag where her magical elixirs are kept. Ruth Taylor aims his next attack at Alvera and rushes towards her point blank. Alvera recognizes that Ruth Taylor is as prepared as Batman. Nevertheless, she makes her attack by magically applying her elixir, throwing it into the protagonist's slicing wind, and says that her preparations end here. A large explosion occurs. The potion Alvera threw into the magic is a chemical reagent prepared from night butterfly flowers and bile mushrooms. When released with magic, it becomes a special chemical reagent that disperses released magics, extinguishing the villain's flames. While they were not looking, Ruth Taylor easily defeated the monster rabbit and asks what the meaning of this is. A mage who doesn't know how to use magic. Alvera gets irritated with our villain, acting as if he has the upper hand, and yells for Taylor to attack. He charges at the protagonist with all his might, but the protagonist, not being foolish, runs to a cabinet and quickly throws it to the ground, where a bucket he had previously prepared spills oil, reigniting the fire. A large explosion prevents Taylor from advancing, and he quickly stops his attack as Alvera desperately screams for him to stop. If a fire starts here in the Ophilis Hall, many people will die. Taylor then says he can cut anything, even fire, and resumes his attack on our villain. However, Alvera shouts for him to wait. As a keen observer, she noticed that the windows are open to prevent smoke from accumulating inside. The carpets are all moved away to prevent the fire from spreading, and there are no flammable objects nearby. Could Ruth Taylor have planned this far ahead? The shark-toothed girl screams as loudly as she can for Taylor not to do it. The protagonist draws his bow and arrow, preparing his next attack. Taylor, just a few meters away, away, thinks he will stop our villain. The protagonist shoots his arrow, but to Taylor's surprise, the attack is not directed at him but at his childhood friend, who is also caught off guard by the sudden attack. With no time to cast a magical spell for defense, luckily for them, the attack is suddenly stopped by Elvira, who narrowly saves her partner's life, thanks to a magical engineering tool that can attract any small object in sight. Even from a distance, something about the arrow still catches her attention. To her surprise, the arrow was covered with cloth, so how did he plan to hurt someone like that? The more she thought about it, the more she began to sweat. She yells again for Taylor to stop going after the protagonist, because he must have another trick up his sleeve. Nonetheless, Taylor doesn't listen and charges furiously at our villain, and their swords clash. Our villain hears a sudden noise, exactly the sound the protagonist was waiting for as the second act of the Ophelis incident unfolds. This involves the second floor boss, student Clebius, who enters in a panic, thinking everyone will die. With his objective achieved, he no longer needs to play the villain. Ruth Taylor lets out a slight sigh, thinking it's finally over. But there's no time for relief as Taylor lands a decisive blow, leaving him battered. Elvira is left speechless, seeing the protagonist's state, wondering what's wrong with him. Taylor goes to Ruth Taylor in desperation, asking if he's crazy and what his motives are for all this. Elvira feels nauseous, sensing that the protagonist was just toying with them during the fight. If Ruth Taylor really wanted to defeat them, he wouldn't have revealed himself and attacked after the chandelier fell, and yet he stood right in front of three people: a warrior, a mage, and an alchemist. During this battle, he didn't relax for a moment and was relentless. That's why Elvira thinks something strange is going on. Taylor grabs the protagonist by the collar to ask if he's crazy. Why go to such lengths? Our protagonist simply tells them to stop barking and go upstairs as fast as possible, which leaves the three of them very confused since Ruth Taylor had been preventing them from going up until now. Elvira then questions why the protagonist let them win. She was furious asking this, and her childhood friend saying it makes no sense. He is Ruth Taylor. There's no way this guy went easy on them. But Elvira doesn't listen and is convinced of this, wanting only for him to answer why he let them win. Our villain does not admit this and merely stares at the girl with a cold gaze. She won't be able to make him say anything. Suddenly, the door to the Ophelis hall opens, revealing a person who chose the persimmon flower brooch after thinking about it all night. This person had one question now. Why was the boy she thought would be waiting for her all dressed up now, lying on the ground, all wounded like that? This person was the crazy Yander, Janica. Since receiving her letter, Janica had considered the possibility that Ed had been dragged into some unexpected situation, but considering his lifestyle and the way he handled the glass attack, no matter what the problem was, big or small, in Janica's eyes, our protagonist made her believe he would resolve any issue somehow. However, she now realized it was a mistake to think so complacently. Seeing the state of the protagonist, she began to reflect. Even though she said she would help Ruth Taylor no matter what happened, he never asked for her help. The reason he lured Janica to the flower garden outside the Ophelis hall, even going so far as to write her a letter, which was unusual for him, was the same reason he fought alone and keep her out of the battlefield, since she had already received several punishments due to the glass incident. She didn't know what happened here, but she knew that our villain treated her with consideration and was attentive enough not to involve her in all this. While she was thinking only about becoming as beautiful as possible for her beloved, he was in this situation. This made her even more furious, asking the three what the reason for all this was. Taylor tries to talk to Janica, saying that it's good she is here. Ruth Taylor tried to stop them and cause this fire. Elvira tells Taylor to stop being stupid. She is an enemy too. Janica says in a chilling and cold voice that she doesn't care about their reasons. All that matters is that they attacked the wrong person. Our villain tells her to calm down, but Janica, even responding softly to him, doesn't want to do that. The other girls soiled their underwear upon feeling the aura of a true elite mage. The creatures Janica summoned are all high-ranking, and there are many of them. The dark girl, her aura suggests she will injure them as badly as her beloved is now. He just needs to wait one more minute. Elvira, with just a look, knows that with this entire battalion of spirits, they have no chance. The girl pulls her friends and says to admit defeat. They don't stand a chance of even scratching her now. They were having trouble just against Ruth Taylor before. Janica doesn't want to hear anything and immediately sends her fleet at the three of them, believing they must be punished. Elvira shouts for Taylor to wake up. He won't be able to make Janica listen to what he wants to say. Taylor refuses to retreat because, due to this madwoman's furious attack, other students here might get hurt. He is a typical hero in this world, and that's when our not at all typical villain interferes, pulling the warrior and saying that when he says to leave, he should go. He throws him with a strength not seen in their fight. Ruth Taylor tells him to listen carefully. He will take care of Janica, and they must go up to the second floor as planned. Ayla is confused because up until now, the protagonist wanted to prevent them from going up, but he responds that he changed his mind. Alvera, indignant, says he won't be able to deal with these spirits while injured like this, but quickly gets a slap on the head to snap her out of it. The protagonist tells her to grab her alchemy jars and go, and apologizes for tearing her bag earlier. She doesn't like taking orders, but she couldn't help but obey after such a handsome guy spoke to her that way. The three run to the second floor while the protagonist stays behind to face the crazed Janica, who is out of her mind. The beautiful girl was about to attack with everything she had until her eyes light up when her love approaches. Her heart felt that it was the protagonist coming towards her. Of course, the girl gets all concerned, telling him not to strain himself, that she will take care of the rest. He can explain everything later. First, she will end this chaos. Our villain raises his hand, thinking that this action is actually a sign of desperation, but that's not what Janica feels. The villain holds her by the shoulders and asks her to calm down with a smile. That dark look from moments before is now warm to such an extent that the previously crazy girl lets out a small moan at that moment. This is actually quite intimate for her. His large, warm hands are on her shoulders, and our villain insists on keeping them there, asking her to send her spirits away first. The strong wind in the room dissipates, and along with it, all the spirits are dispersed as well. The trio from before notice the change in the place and are shocked to see that he actually managed to stop that girl. He just gestures for them to go up quickly, as this girl stands no chance against him. The waifu that I know you all wanted in your lives calls out to her beloved, but our villain has no more strength left. Having accomplished his goal, he doesn't even have the energy to fall carefully, collapsing face first to the ground. The whole hall echoes with Janica's scream. After waking the man with that scream, she tries to understand the situation. She doesn't know what happened, but she remembers to be angry with those three for doing this to him. All she wants now is for him to promise to stop getting hurt like this, and of course, he does and thanks her. After all, he too would like to avoid suffering so much every time. He then gets up, thinking he did his job as the boss of the first floor. Now he can relax. But upon hearing Janica talk about a certain carriage she saw outside, a carriage with a golden crown, a slight worry crosses his mind. The golden crown is the symbol of the elite merchant association, the adoptive father of Loretel, and the one who killed his biological father, the false boss who will disappear after losing to Loretel, the father of our waifu, the Golden King Elf. But the important fact is that his arrival at the academy earlier than expected means something is happening off the main story's tracks, something beyond our villain ED's knowledge. Watching from afar, the slender silhouette observing that newly arrived carriage is Loretel, asking the head maid if she also knows that mean-looking guy. Alice, the head maid, asks if she's talking about our protagonist whom they met at the camp. Loretel confirms, and Alice even makes a light joke, suggesting that Loretel has a thing for our protagonist. Loretel responds that our villain is quite cute, but that's not what she means. Rather, she had a feeling he was similar to Alice. On this, Loretel says she asked our protagonist if he could sympathize with someone like her, and his answer was not at all pleasant. He said she must take responsibility for the choices she made and left her mercilessly. That's why Loretel says people like them are doomed to hear such things from others. Alice, who had been the academy's head maid for about 20 years, started from scratch as an apprentice maid at 15. She proved very competent and became the manager of the Ophelis Hall. Most of Loretel's investments went there, and she spent a good sum to sway Alice from her righteousness. These losses created significant holes in Loretel's financial records, but she did not consider them wasteful. With a genuine smile, she tells Alice that she is very lucky to have someone like her by her side. Loretel found someone like her, someone who would abandon strict beliefs and values for a few gold coins, someone similar to herself. Loretel believes that only by knowing other broken people like herself can she stop feeling lonely, but regardless of her unhappy past or sad story, Loretel is clearly a villainous character, a hidden villain. She tells Alice that they will destroy the Ophelis Hall from the inside. As everything is going as planned, Loretel tells her accomplice that she will go to the storage room now, as she needs to play the role of the frightened innocent character who fled there. But unfortunately, folks, something went out of the girl's control. Alice draws her sword and says that a pitiful human like her, who never loved anyone or had anyone she could consider family, will be alone even in her death. Alice says she is not like her, and somehow, despite being terrified, Loretel expected this could happen. Meanwhile, on the second floor of the Ophelis Hall, the floor boss, Clevius was controlled by Taylor through sheer force. On the third floor, the maid Kelly was defeated by the main group as well. Thus Taylor and the group moved to the fourth and final floor, thinking that the only challenge they had faced so far during their ascent of the Ophilis Hall was against the first floor boss, our villain Ruth Taylor, who had even let them win. Upon hearing a scream from the fourth floor that scared even Alvera, they saw before them the visage of a person intoxicated with power, while the students who were part of this attack fled. The fourth floor boss, a hostage of the protective magic of Willain from the Ophilis Academy. The hall's self-defense system was now being used to attack the students themselves. As the battle took place on the fourth and final floor, people felt the tremors of the attacks and were terrified. Trembling and screaming in fear, wondering where the maids were at a time like this, the students decided to jump out of the hall windows, despite being on the upper floors. The entire situation turned into a catastrophe. Taylor's group struggled to face the hostage. Taylor asked Alvera if she had her night butterfly potion, which disrupts wizards' magic. The girl said it was useless because the source of the magic was an artifact, so she took the lead and used a weed reagent to block the boss's magical attacks. She assisted with defense and then kicked Clevius's butt to help Taylor defeat the fourth floor boss. After dodging dozens of spells, the hostage who was being forcibly used cried out as someone finally managed to defeat the artifact, causing a huge explosion on the fourth floor that was even visible from outside through the windows. Our villain saw this explosion from outside. Janica, still by his side, asked why he was still here. If he didn't treat his wounds soon, there could be complications. Our villain told her not to worry, that blood wasn't even his. The reason he remained lurking was to see this person arrive. Originally, the Golden King would be escorted by a large fleet of carriages, but his discreet approach told our villain that he had secret intentions here. This person wasn't supposed to be here now, so why? The MC knew that this carriage had been here for quite some time, but it was only leaving now. Was he waiting for the Ophilis Hall to be destroyed? Moreover, that person surprised our villain, the maid from the third floor, Shenny. She was one of the orphans raised by the head maid Alice. What our MC knew was that Alice had originally been bribed by Lortel, and Shenny was supposed to be the third floor boss. The MC then thought it would be impossible for Shenny to betray Alice, so the only alternative was the opposite, Alice betraying Lortel. If that were the case, there was only one possible future in this situation: Lortel's downfall. The villain Lortel engages in a political struggle with Phonia in Act 3 of the game, and is also the main ally of the protagonist against the Ruth Taylor family in Act 4. Our villain thought it was already difficult enough to take Toad's place as the first floor boss. Now would he have to take Lortel's role? The MC knew that was madness, so he had to resolve this too. For the first time, the protagonist said he had a favor to ask Janica, that it was urgent and he couldn't handle it alone. He didn't know how to explain it to convince her to help, but to his surprise, the girl agreed without questioning. She just told him to say what she needed to do. So listen carefully. Someone sent a letter to Elt informing him of Lortel's intentions to betray him and take control of the mercantile industry, as she knew it was Elt who killed her biological parents. By revealing her plans, talking about the purchase of the sealed grimoire from the sage, which was just an excuse to lure Elt to the academy, and this was bait to stab him in the back. In that same letter, it was mentioned that certain factors led to the discovery of all this, and that now the sender of this letter is in possession of confidential documents that can prove Lortel's plot. However, since Lortel offered a large sum of money to the letter sender, unless a larger amount is offered, the sender of this letter will stand by Lortel. His reason is that he is losing his vision due to an accident and has almost completely lost his hearing, and this will be his last year as a maid in this academy. And to everyone's surprise, the sender of this letter is the head maid of the academy, Sylvania, who betrayed Lortel and went to the side of her greatest enemy, head maid Alice. The woman also mentions in the letter where the money should be sent if Elt accepts her agreements, with all this money being sent to the orphanages that Alice manages. I think here we can understand Alice's motivation when she said she is not like Lortel. Both played dirty, but Alice's motivation is different from the lonely waifu Lortel. What do you think about this? Did you predict this? I bet not. Alice placed the cold metal on her neck and told Lortel not to move. Her adoptive father would arrive soon. The head maid remarks that she didn't expect to see that look on the girl's face. She thought Lortel was more composed. Alice says that Lortel claims to be seeking revenge on the Golden King, but in Alice's eyes, Lortel and her adoptive father are no different from each other. Lortel had no escape. All she could do was freeze in fear with the cold steel at her neck. That's when something heats up our favorite girl villain, an explosion, and the students group arrives at the scene. Alvira points out the responsible for this attack and Taylor should be careful when defeating her alone. Loratel takes advantage of the situation and falls to the ground, claiming she is just a victim who was mistreated by the traitor Alice. The girl should just say she's okay and that Alice planned all this, but her face didn't match those words, and everyone is amazed at her expression. What could be wrong with her? Loratel runs, covering her face from everyone. She now knows that the Golden King Elt is coming. That man trusts no one, so he must have come here himself. Loratel says the plan is almost complete. Elt will end up being responsible for the widespread tampering of the accounting books and the damage to this place, meaning he will be blamed for stealing and destroying Liz. She's never been closer. Now that he's here, Loratel just needs to send the carrier pigeons hidden in her room and hide. Everything will go right if she isn't caught. The lonely girl runs, motivated, but stops for a moment and remembers the words of our villain. If Alice is not like her, then there is no one in this world who understands her, which means as for Alice's betrayal, she expected it to be possible since she has been through it countless times. But the pain in her heart at this moment she has never felt before. Loratel melts into tears, and she even says it doesn't suit her. Since it's like this, she must do what she can to get to her room before Elt reaches the hall. At the same time, on the first floor of the main hall, Elt enters with his troop and then asks a person in front of him if he is a student and should leave here as soon as possible. The student, on the other hand, replies that due to a collapse, no one is allowed to enter there. This person is our third-rate villain from a game, Ed Roth Taylor. He says no one will climb those stairs now. Elt questions if it was the academy itself that gave these instructions to the student, and the MC says no, he is acting on his own while following the academy's rules. Our protagonist knows that only 3 people know the flow of history. Loratel, who wants to destroy Elt and take revenge on his childhood by taking his seat as mercantile president. Elt, who is here now determined to thwart Loratel's plans and buy the sealed grimoire from the wise woman, and using both at the same time, both Loratel and Elt, the maid Alice, the root cause of this plot twist in the story. The protagonist doesn't know Alice's motives for betrayal, but he knows she is on the 5th floor now, and knows that as the plot progresses, Taylor and his main group will run into Alice, and as our villain has already confirmed their abilities, Roth Taylor can trust them. This means he just needs to deal with the matter here, keep Elt out of the events in the Ophelis Hall to maintain the order of the main story. With that in mind, he shows that he recognizes the man in front of him. He is Elt Kelchin, the president of Elt Commerce, but he must go speak to the academy first. Elt then says he understands everything now. His dark aura takes over his face, and he asks if the boy is on Loratel's side. Look, 10 minutes ago, when our villain was with Janica and asked for a favor, he intentionally destroyed Jigsu's room wall and said that everything was in chaos. So why is he still in his room? The guy says it's not explosions that will disrupt his training, but because Ruth Taylor is out there destroying walls. Now it's going to be cold when he goes to sleep. Jigsu, when he realizes that Janica is also there, greets her properly. They haven't seen each other since the Glaskin incident. Janica apologizes for everything and seems disheartened by it. Jigsu says that's in the past and she has already been punished for it. Now, more importantly, he asks if they are now a couple. Janica, embarrassed and shy as she is, says it's not that, but seeing her beloved look that way, she wonders if it bothered him. The MC isn't bothered by it. It's Jigsu's fault for asking rude questions, and that's how he managed to ask Jigsu for a favor, and the MC would repay him later. So at the present moment, when Elt was facing our villain and questioning if he had fallen for Loratel's monotonous appearance, Elt says he might enjoy a few coins she offered him, but Elt asserts that Loratel has the cunning of a fox and stabs others in the back as soon as they turn around. He knows because he raised her. The Golden King even says he would love to pay twice the amount of gold coins that Fox offered, so Roth Taylor thanks for the offer, but they didn't promise him any gold coins, so what's the point of 00? Elt understands what the boy was trying to get at. If words weren't enough to convince him, force must be. Looking around, our villain was surrounded. He tried to escape, but it wouldn't be possible. That's when the 2 people arrived to help him. Jigsu and Janica attacked the soldiers. He asked the 2 to take care of this, and he will repay this favor later, and the 2 are not intimidated by the enemy they will have to face. They engage in combat, and that doesn't matter as much as our villain's objective. He should find Loratel and ask her about this situation, and after a moment of distraction, he realizes he's in the girl's path. Our villain wastes no time and asks if she hasn't managed to leave yet. The girl, of course, is shocked. She didn't expect to encounter this guy. Roth Taylor asks if she can run, and he'll help her. Let me tell you something, there's always a reason behind every goodwill and trust. Even the Elt store receptionist always acts as if he's flirting with Loratel because he hopes she'll provide some information. Kadan, the mercantile employee, also gets very excited in front of Loratel because he always gets tips from her about something. The reason why the Academy bird clings so much to to Lortel is that she always gives him the highest quality food. Lortel's world revolves around these twisted acts of kindness when they want something in return. So while running alongside Roth Taylor, the girl didn't understand the reason. The MC takes the opportunity to ask if she was betrayed by Alice. Distressed, Lortel couldn't stop thinking that it's her fault for all this. Janica Faylover grew up receiving love and kindness, and that's why she treats the world the same way. That day she saw Janica offer help to Ed Roth Taylor with a gentle and happy look, without wanting anything in return or greed, and that filled her with illusion, thinking she could feel that too. It was because she wanted to feel that too that she told her plans to Alice, thinking she could have that with her too. But that humiliated her feelings once again. Lortel stops and thinks she shouldn't have tried to push away her dark and filthy side. And how could someone like her live such a romantic life? To get to the Ophelis Hall, she bribed 5 people: head maid Alice, twin maids Shenny and Kelly, lower student representative Willis, and fallen noble Ed. The twins joined Elt, so did Willis. Alice betrayed her, and now she knows what to expect from Ed too. So she apologizes, stopping her walk and wondering why she's saying this to him. Why? Because he's an ally. She tells Ed that she can no longer pay the 20 gold coins she promised before. As he can see, the situation at the moment is unstable. Internally, Lortel wonders why she's saying smart things to someone who isn't even on her side. The sad and melancholic girl is startled to hear the words, "And I asked." Ed grabs her arm and pulls her while saying he doesn't have time. If Eld catches her, her life will be over. If she wants to plan things for the future, first they have to get out of here. I know you guys understand that. At this moment he pulls the girl from the dark corridor forward where it is illuminated. It's beautiful to see that at this moment. Lortel managed to feel goodwill and trust coming from someone. The girl thinks about something she never had, but she's sure there's always a reason for these people. If you don't see the reason behind people, you don't trust them. Lortel is silent for a few seconds when Ed asks her to tell him what's going on. After thinking it over 1,000 times, she decides to tell. Lortel reveals that this is the work of her father. She quickly explains everything about what happened and her father's intentions to monopolize the armor market to make a lot of money urgently. Ulf found someone who would buy the sealed grimoire of the sage for a good price, and then he sent Lortel to Sylvania Academy to find a way to steal. Our villain, after interrupting quite a bit, says he understands everything and doesn't need her to explain the rest. In manipulative commerce, merchants monopolize a cheap product in the market and artificially increase its price to negotiate among themselves, a classic method still used today by retailers to manipulate their prices. As prices continuously rise, consumers think that product will soon be unavailable, making them feel the need to buy it now. And if such products gathered so far are sold at this exact moment, an absurd amount of money can be obtained. But for such price manipulation to work, trust between merchants is necessary, and if you sell a product without the knowledge of the other, the price will drop instantly, just like in the stock markets. Elt desperately sold his shares to buy armor in bulk to monopolize their prices and make a lot of money at the right time. Lortel's plan was to be in touch with other merchants for years and bribe them to put the armor on sale when Elt wasn't at the merchant's headquarters. And that's why she made this plan, to lure Elt and make him lose all his power due to sudden loss. Ed then says it worked. Elt came to the academy, so all she has to do is send the message to the merchants to set the price of the armor. Right. Lortel wonders how the hell he managed to understand everything at once. She tells everything about how she will send this message to the merchant's headquarters. A carrier pigeon in her room has the message. Lortel also thinks her father is waiting for this and intends to capture her here to make the internal traders confess the whole plan. Our villain, after hearing everything, asks Lortel to listen carefully. From now on, she must remain hidden until it's all over. Ed says that if he were Elt, he would put people watching the 2 bridges leaving the city. Lortel must talk to the knight in the quarters and send an empty carriage to the Arkan Mountains and hide it well. This will make the soldiers think she is hiding in the Arkan Mountains. Meanwhile, she must hide in her unfinished cabin in the forest for 3 days. Our villain says he will send the carrier pigeon in her place. It's at this moment that Roth Taylor realizes something and grabs the girl and throws her against the wall. Someone is watching the back door. He will run to her room and take care of the people outside. She waits here until the person leaves and then flees to the dormitory. He took care of the matters without wasting time. Ed's actions and words made Lortel think she could trust him with everything. While the waifu was mesmerized by this moment, Ed questioned if the girl is in her right mind because she was out of it. The Lortel he knows isn't careless like this. All of this happened so quickly, and it might even work, but the girl desperately wants to understand why he's helping so much. Our villain didn't expect such a question now. How can he convince this girl now? Ed simply says there's no reason. He just felt he should help her and walked out the door. After closing the door, she hears the rain falling outside, and then she collapses inside. Now she hears something else very, very loud. It was a sound louder than the fights all over this place. It wasn't any of those places. The sound was coming from somewhere closer. Laurel couldn't believe that this loud sound was her heart almost exploding.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on upcoming videos. Leave a like if you enjoyed it and share with your friends. See you in the next video. Bye for now.